The meeting of this October 5th, 2022, Planning Commission to order. Would you please call roll.
Ryan Pearson,
Here.
Paul Wagaman,
Present.
Philip Combs,
Present.
Lynn Larson,
Here.
Brian Parsons,
Here.
Robert Estrada is excused. Don Daniels,
Here.
you have quorum.
Thank you. Before us, we have the minutes of September 21st, 2022. I'm looking for a motion.
Make a motion. Second.
Okay, Mr. Wagaman made a motion. Okay, thank you.
Second.
And Mr. Larson had a second. Any discussion or changes? Hearing or seeing none at this time. All those in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Abstentions? Hearing none, minutes passed as written. Thank you. Any changes to our agenda tonight?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we'll just, public comment. So anyone wishing to make any comments at this time about any subject from the public, you're willing, able, you can do it this time. And if you're here to talk about the public hearing, I would recommend that you wait on the plan amendment docket until that time when I open up the public hearing. So right now, we'll just open up the public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak? Any of our guests in person want to speak under public comment on any subjects? No, that there. Okay, anyone online? Here you go. I see a hand.
Mr. Remy, if you're here for the public hearing on the comp plan amendments, that's in a separate section of the meeting. But if you'd like to speak about something else, you're welcome to.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, so one last time, no one else on the public comment period. Okay, we'll close the public comment period at this time. And we'll move right to number 6 under the public hearing, which tonight we're going to open up the public hearing of the 2023 comp plan amendment docket. Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, apologies. It'll take a second. There we go. Okay, so there was a study session held on September 21st for the 2023 Comprehensive Plan Amendment Docket. There were 8 applications between private applications and city initiated amendments. And where we sit in the process is the Planning Commission is reviewing the docket list, deciding if it wants to edit that list, add anything, take anything off as its recommendation onto the City Council. Tonight is the public hearing on the applications. So very quickly, it is available online, information about this comprehensive plan cycle at cityoflakewood.us/long-range planning. And if I can get it to move, there we go. We worked through these in the study session, but again, to summarize, there is an application to request a redesignation and rezoning of a parcel at 8821 John Dower Road from multifamily 1 to commercial 1. There is an application to rezone 3 parcels altogether from multifamily 3 to central business district. That's 2023-02. Application 2023-03 is looking to redesignate parcels from mixed residential to open space and recreation 2. And then the 4th private application is to redesignate and rezone parcels for development of low-income housing. So I didn't include any names on here tonight, but for everyone's reference, the first one is relating to the Yelm request. The second is relating to the Remy request. The third is Lakewood Racquet Club. And the 4th is LASA, which is Living Access Support Association, I believe. The city amendments, there's 4 of those as well. One is to allow permanent supportive and transitional housing within the commercial zones of the city per state law change. The 6th is a change to policy LU 5.3 in our city's comprehensive plan. That's again a reaction to some change in state law allowing for different types of funding for relocation assistance. The 7th application is to rezone 1 parcel near Wards Lake to include it in Wards Lake. And the final is to update the comprehensive plan text and maps as appropriate now that the Western State Hospital Master Plan is nearing completion. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm ready for public comment unless the council or committee has any questions for me first.
Okay, good. So at this time, we'll open, have the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak tonight on public hearing regarding the 2023 Comp Plan Amendment Docket? I got Mr. Sweeney.
Yes, sir. I was interested in 2023-02, the Remy one. Mr. Remy has retained my services to assist him. I helped complete the secret checklist and the application materials that came before you. I didn't know if any folks had any questions or issues or concerns about the specifics of it. If you look at your little parcel map here, you can look or look out the window right over there. You can see what we're talking about. Except for I think the map here probably included some M1 parcels, which are I don't think part of the application process. We're only looking at the 3 elongated ones that have the villa apartments over there. Those apartments are probably about my age. And
Really
if you,
young.
yeah. And if you look at that 1.65 acres, you can see it really is kind of shouting out for redevelopment. And the kind of the thrust of the downtown plan, if you go back and re-review it, was really to incentivize redevelopment of parcels to try to create kind of a new central business district element and plan as part of the city, including some pretty aggressive high density residential uses in conformance with the plan, which has some pretty good incentives to try to incentivize that. And all things, being straight up, my client would like to take advantage of those. And given the proximity or the adjacent, nature, we were kind of speculating as to 4 years ago why it wasn't included at the time. And there might have been a reason we couldn't fathom it, but it seems to be kind of a good fit with the main street coming right on through, and certainly might be worth something to give consideration to here next year, and perhaps take ultimately before the city council for kind of maybe almost a relook not only at this particular parcel, but maybe at the entire plan. October will be its 4th year anniversary, and might give you a kind of a chance to look at the entirety of the plan just in the context of this, to say, did it succeed? Is it working? Would this be a fit for that kind of plan element? And I analyzed some of the plan elements, but we go into it more in detail at a future consideration. But it's to be a high risk venture to try to put the number of units that the zone would allow there, either under M3 or under the CBD downtown plan, and any incentives to try to mollify that risk, especially as we fly into a new economy, might be an incentive in and of itself. And the two big ones are clearly the increased lot area you would get inside of the CBD, and I don't make any bones about that. And also, most importantly, is the reduced parking, going from 1.5 in the M3 to 1 per unit in the CBD zone. It's parking is just atrociously expensive to try to build, no matter how you do it, and that it would certainly be an advantage and an incentive to kind of take a flyer at that project. So that's all we really had. I know Claude is on the line. I don't know if he wanted to chime in later, but that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, great. And while we're on the same application here, so Mr. Remy, go right ahead. And
He probably says, why did I hire him? He's the one who's supposed to do all the talking.
Can you hear me?
go ahead.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. As Mr. Sweeney pointed out, I thought I would take advantage of the opportunity to use the Comp Plan Amendment as a vehicle to change the zoning from MF3 to the CBD zoning. And that came about as a result of preliminary plans. I had cone architecture to draw with some recommendations. And basically what we're realizing is that to provide some of the amenities that I was considering and so forth, to take advantage of the full property, we weren't utilizing the property to its maximum capacity. So it then became apparent that maybe getting the opportunity to avail ourselves of this zoning complement change would be a good use of our time. In addition, what we have found through trying to develop properties of that magnitude, of that size of and type, in order to provide affordable units, the more density that we have, that we can basically amortize the property to more units, the better it is, because then it costs less per unit. So that is really the thrust of our aim here, is basically to take advantage of the comp plan amendment and be able to provide more affordable homes by being able to get more density.
Great. We appreciate your comments and thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate that. Mr. Larson.
Question for Mr. Remy. This is Lynn Larson. Do you have a limit on a schedule for the number of people who can occupy any single unit?
Mr. Remy, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, yeah, I'm not the one who decides that, to be honest with you. That I think that's guided by the laws of tenancy. I can't tell someone that they, well, I can tell someone that they can't have 5 people in a studio, but if a person wants to use 2 people, 2 persons per studio, that's fine. 2 persons or 3 persons for 1 bedroom, a husband, wife, and a baby, that's usually fine. So no, it's, those things are usually guided by what the market would bear. I don't get involved in that area.
How do you schedule your parking then? If you can allow more than 1 car per unit, say you've got 2 bachelor GIs want to occupy a unit, each one has a car, and you're limited to 1 car per unit. How would you plan to deal with that?
Well, interestingly, that's a great question. One of the reasons why this particular project for me was something that we thought about doing in the CBD district, and the 1 unit per 1 parking per unit would make sense, has a lot more to do with the fact that we're right there where all the services are. And if what we're seeing throughout the industry and including the jurisdictions throughout the, whether it's Seattle, Tacoma, Bellevue, or elsewhere, is that even University Place, is that they're anticipating that people will be using their cars less and less, and maybe use Uber, or if they are within close proximity of all the first services, they most likely would rent in our space because there's not a need for a car at that point in time. If anything, that's the beauty of being right there at that location, is that we anticipate we can really get a lot of people who probably would care about having 2 cars in a family. Maybe 1 would suffice. But that is a great question. And honestly, Normally, I am for more parking because I own other real estate that tend to be more of the, more of the suburban type of properties. And what we find is that because again of location and distance, they tend to want to have more parking spaces. Okay? Conversely speaking, what we have found is that people who live closer in and have where they can walk to their bank, where they can walk to the grocery place, where they can go to the movie theaters, walk to the movie theaters, or the book Barnes and Noble, for example, or Starbucks and all that, they are less concerned about the parking. That's what we find in the industry. So that's why I don't know, to be honest with you, Mr. Lawson, if that would actually present a problem in the future. And by the way, just because it says one-to-one parking is what would be required in a CBD, it doesn't mean I would only do a one-to-one parking. I would always do more than that. I just want to be boxed in the event that the designs that we're doing will hinder us from being able to move forward. In addition, I'm expecting a lot of 55 and older in this project, to be honest, again, because of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Proximity to services.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie. Go ahead, Mr. Larson.
Second question is, how are you going to deal with displacing the current tenants in the building that you plan to tear down?
Great question again. I am in the middle of building other projects in Lakewood, and several of my tenants would meet some of the qualifications that I put aside for affordable housing, and they will have an opportunity to apply and relocate to those.
How many tenants are in those buildings?
Pardon me?
How many tenants do you have in the current facility?
16.
Thank you.
And I'm currently building 99 units in Lakewood.
Thank you.
Okay.
Last point is this project, in my eyes, seems to make common sense in terms of increasing the density in the city. I wonder whether it might be, and I don't know how exactly this will work, but to take the expansion of the zoning in some manner all the way out to the intersection going to the south, and have it be a comprehensive look. So if you look at this from Google Earth, looking down, you've got St. Francis Cabrini and its campus. You've got Lakewood Town Center and its campus. And if we brought the CBD part all the way out to the intersection, then it would provide for more consistent land use in the larger picture. And I think that makes some common sense also to take a look at that while we're looking at this specific project and transition from that.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Thank you.
Yes. So, and I think Mr. Sweeney alluded to that in his opening remarks, that it appears that the project or the initial CBD plan should have included, for certain, my project, but I also thought that you're right, it should have actually gone all the way to the intersection to create a more uniform a piece of property in zoning.
So Tiffany,
Just for the benefit of the planning commission, the way the process will work is we'll have this planning commission public hearing tonight. At the next meeting, if you feel that it's appropriate to edit or amend any of the applications that you have before you tonight in any way, including increasing the number of parcels the system would cover, that's within your purview to do. So if the planning commission wants to do that and then make that recommendation to council, you can.
We can only apply for our
yeah,
parcels.
yeah, absolutely right. Yes, of course. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Remy. We appreciate your comments and answering our questions. Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Okay, yes, anyone else like to speak tonight on the public hearing or any projects? No, none of the projects. Okay. Okay, we have someone online that would like to speak on public hearing.
It just says Galaxy S10e, but please go ahead.
Hi, this is Jan Hutchins with LASA. And we put in an application to change the zoning on some properties well, actually 3 houses at the corner of Fairlawn, Gravelly Lake, and 59th Street Southwest. It's currently zoned R4 and the proposed zoning is NC2. And I believe you've had a chance to read what our application, and I'm just really here to see if you have any questions.
This is in relation to application 2023-04.
The Gravelly Lake Commons.
Yes.
Yes, great. Does any commissioners have any comments or questions? Mr. Larson?
It seems to me that additional area or a project similar to what's already there makes a lot of sense. And it's compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, the single family residential nature of it. And it also takes advantage of the Gravelly Lake Drive corridor. Doesn't seem there's some conflict with anything as I can see.
Any other comments? Seeing none at this time, we appreciate your comments and thank you for coming before us tonight.
Thank you.
Right. We have someone else.
Nope, that's it.
That's it.
Unless there's anyone else in the room that wishes to talk about that.
Nothing on the Rocket Club. Just here. Okay. Awesome. So any commissioners have any other questions, concerns, any at this time? Ms. Tiffany?
If there's no other questions or discussion from council or commission, sorry, I would request that you would keep the record open just with the technical stuff that we got tonight. So maybe through October 19th.
So yes, so we'll this time then we'll extend the public hearing of the 2023 comp plan amendments until November 19th.
October.
Oh, excuse me. October 19th, 2022. And by the close of that day.
By noon on that day.
By noon on
Yep.
the 19th, October 19th. So leave the public hearing open at that time. Anyone wishing to comment, write in, please do so. Okay,
Have we moved on to the next item?
we're gonna do that.
Okay, I didn't know.
Are you in a hurry tonight?
No.
Okay.
I didn't know where you were, and
No
I didn't-
problem. You don't have a paper. Oh, you need to follow the. Okay. Number 7, unfinished business. We do not have any unfinished business on number 7, so we move right to number 8, if that's all right with Mr. Larson. Right under new business, and that's the 2024 comp plan periodic review process. And we're gonna talk about housing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this evening, this was just a one line item here, but we actually have 2 different presentations for the planning commission. First is going to be from our guests from the Department of Commerce, one of whom is named Ann Fritzel, the other is named Shane Hope. And so I believe Shane will take the lead, but Ann, I'll open it up if you want to start and turn it over to Shane or however you want to handle it.
Thank you, Tiffany. This is Ann Fritzl. I'm the Housing Programs Manager here at the Department of Commerce in the Growth Management Services Unit. We have a presentation for you today. Tiffany, are you going to present, or is there a way to promote me so I can present?
If you would rather do it, that'll probably be easier for continuity. So let me promote you to a panelist. Go ahead.
Great.
Yay.
Thank you so much. So as I said, I'm the program manager for housing here at Growth, and I have Shane Hope with me. Shane has a long history in planning in the state, working in multiple cities as a planning director. She's joined our group to work on housing. We're really working on some pivotal changes to the way we plan for housing in this state. And so we're really excited to have her here. Shane, do you want to turn on your camera and I can start sharing the
I would be glad to turn on my camera, except I'm not seeing a button for that.
There we go. Hang in there.
Okay.
And while she's switching, just for the commission's benefit, the 2024 process is one where the city has to request review and approval by the Department of Commerce for the comp plan updates, and also to PSRC. So if you remember last meeting, we had Paul Ingram from PSRC talking about them. Department of Commerce is the other agency that will be looking at the comp plan amendments come 2024. So take it away again, Shane and Ann.
Great, thank you. And Shane will talk about the role of Commerce and PSRC in the element. So I'm going to present and she'll take it away.
All right. So glad to be with you tonight. We are going to talk about the requirements currently for local housing and planning. As Ann mentioned, it's changed somewhat from the old version, and we're going to talk about that a little more. So first off, the next slide, we'll have a couple slides, just an overview about our agency, Department of Commerce. We work with communities on a whole range of issues. Planning and development regulations are just a part of what Commerce does, but we're here representing that part tonight. One of the major frameworks for planning and development in our state is the Growth Management Act. And you may know that that was a broad act that was adopted in 1990. It went together with some of our other environmental planning and so on. But primarily looking at addressing sprawl issues and quality of life issues. It requires local governments to do some planning, certain kinds of planning and development regulations. So state law guides that. Our agency is tasked with providing assistance for it. And then all of it is supposed to be regionally coordinated. So cities and counties or cities next to each other, for example, may need to coordinate on some things. And so really, most of the state has to follow the full Growth Management Act. There are a few more rural counties, which are shown in the gray there, that don't have to follow the full things, but they do have to do planning for natural resources and critical areas. All the rest are doing more planning. That represents about 95% of the state's population. So the framework on that is the Growth Management Act has 14 goals. They're broad goals, and they provide some information and guidance for what needs to happen next. And there's also specific requirements in that set of provisions in the state law. And then there's also flexibility within the framework for others to do things. So for example, every county works with the cities that are within that, the towns and cities, and work to further implement the kinds of goals and requirements that are in the Growth Management Act, but tailoring it somewhat to that that county. For some counties, there's also multi-county planning policies, and Pierce County is part of that multi-county approach as well. And then that's still at a fairly broad level. Then we get down to the local level and look at comprehensive plans specifically that fit the community and the community's development regulations. That means the zoning map and other kinds of things that have to do with how development can happen, the whole range of things. But in addition to that aspect of growth management is the notion that local governments also need to do their capital facility planning and budgeting in mind with the future of their community as they've laid it out in their comprehensive plans. And private development has to follow the plans and regulations that are there. And sometimes there are other kinds of programs that might not be a requirement, but might be an activity that the local government sponsors in order to encourage things that they want to do. Now, the comprehensive plan in each community has to follow certain elements or chapters. They're usually divided into, don't have to be divided in as chapters, but they cover the subject of land use. So there's a whole range of things with land uses that have to do with the economy and the environment and other things. There's an element that needs to deal specifically with transportation. Oh, and let me say that land use also includes population and population expectations. Transportation has to match that. All of these elements have to be consistent with each other in the long run. And then there's the housing element, which we're going to talk most about tonight. It's also utilities, capital facilities, and for counties, they have to also work on things with rural character. But we're going to talk about the housing tonight and how the requirements have changed a little bit in terms of what local governments need to do. It's important to remember in the context of things that our state and pretty much every county in the state is short on the housing that they need. It's estimated about 225,000 homes we're short of in the state of Washington. Why are we short? Well, there's a whole lot of reasons for that, but we have more people that need housing, and the cost of that housing keeps going up in large part, because the demand is greater than the supply. Now, housing shortages aren't new. They have happened in various periods of time, but our state is also not the only one that has a problem with that. Oregon and California have noted that in particularly, and they've taken some steps to better do some planning for housing needs. One of the things in Washington, we recognize that not only, and this is true for other states, not only are we short on housing that's affordable for a whole range of people or available at all, but the cost burden that we've talked about, the high costs, are felt the most in lower income communities. Often these are communities of Black, Indigenous people of color, though not exclusively so. The home ownership rate, though, for an example of that with communities of color is quite a bit lower than that of white households, non-Hispanic white households. That's what the census and other follow-up data show. So recognizing all of that, the state legislature adopted a bill called House Bill 1220. It's now state law, and that directed communities to deal with some of these issues a little bit more robustly than they have in the past. So one example of that is, in the past, the Growth Management Act called for the housing element to have a goal, and that goal was to plan for, or rather to plan and encourage the availability of affordable housing for all economic segments. That was changed not to just plan for and encourage, but to plan for and accommodate housing affordable for all economic segments. And that accommodate is, of course, an interesting word. It doesn't mean that the local government is supposed to go out and build things or force people to turn their property into something else, but rather it's the local government's role to make sure that it's possible to build the housing that's needed in their community where it makes sense. So our agency, the Department of Commerce, is then required to provide some assistance to local governments on that, and particularly to help them identify what that housing need is in a way that's kind of consistent across communities. So in particular, it was recognized that there's a need to know, well, how much moderate income, how much housing is needed for moderate income households? How much is needed for low or very low or extremely low income households? What are those costs? So our agency was tasked with identifying those numbers based on a lot of research and data to show what those income level households are and what kinds of housing and numbers would provide that, not just for next year, but over a longer period of time. 20 years is what you plan for typically in a comprehensive plan. In addition, there was a need, and Commerce was tasked with identifying the need for permanent supportive housing and emergency housing, and sometimes emergency shelters, which can be slightly different. So it's not saying exactly where those need to go. There's a lot of discretion that local governments get to have, but they do need to provide for that. So our job is to provide some numbers and for local governments to work through how they can accommodate those. Again, the housing element became a little bit more explicit. So the requirements in the Growth Management Act, GMA, say not only identify sufficient capacity of land for housing in general, but look at the number of units and the housing types provided that our department will be providing, and then within urban growth areas, and of course all cities are within urban growth areas, provide moderate density housing options such as townhomes and duplexes and so on. And also, as part of the process, document the barriers to having enough affordable housing for those needs. Now, some of those barriers may be things like, oh, you need some more funding or federal funding to help do something. Other times it can be the development regulations, particularly zoning regulations themselves, can be a barrier. They don't allow possibly some of the housing that's needed. So local governments are tasked with finding those barriers and making provisions so that all of those different income level households and special housing needs can be provided for. Thinking through all of the things, there are different options with employment relationships and perhaps accessory dwelling units and so on. And a few more of the changes also relate to that larger goal for a range of housing needs. So in the comprehensive plan, the policies live there, as you know, and the regulations also have to be implemented for those policies. And they need to deal with the fact that there's been disparate impacts. People that have not as much income levels, maybe less than average, or that have suffered through racial discrimination in the past or other kinds of inequities, are really priced out of the market. There is not nearly enough available for those income levels. And at the same time, we want to be thinking about, well, not displacing people that are in an area that have experienced past problems getting housing. So think about that too. And who's excluded from the housing market, what the factors are. Certainly there's some factors that are not under local control, but there are some that can be influenced by what city or county does. So the idea is to begin to undo these, examine the impacts and begin to undo them through policies and regulations while other work is going on in other sectors, and establish policies to prevent displacing people where possible, or to give them other opportunities for living as redevelopment occurs in some cases. One of the things we talked about is that the agency, Department of Commerce, is going to project some draft housing needs. This up on the screen is just the concept. We don't have the numbers quite yet, but we're getting much closer. We would provide those numbers as a draft, allow time for feedback, and make final adjustments. So we think that the numbers will be ready in the next week or so, and then that will just be a draft level. Again, it's up to the cities and counties to work through exactly how that's going to play out at their level. And if there's a need for changes in those numbers, then that can still be done as well. By January, we expect the numbers would be finalized. So again, that is part of implementing the new changes in the Growth Management Act, means that countywide housing needs will be allocated by those income brackets. The cities and counties will need to agree or work through a process for how those needs will be shared among the different cities in each county. And then at the local level, plan for their policies, any adjustments that are needed in the comp plan, what the zoning assumptions are, so that they're sure that they actually have the land capacity, not just, oh, it must be out there somewhere, but there is a place where that kind of housing can go for the various needs. And they'll make, and each city and county is expected to make some adjustments to their regulations if needed to accommodate that amount of and types of housing. There could be other things too that local governments want to look at. They might find, for example, they have some barriers in the way their fee structures are, or maybe there's some assistance they can provide or choose to provide in terms of connection fees or utility rate discounts, or could be different things that make sense to that particular community. So the idea is to identify the tools that will make it more possible to provide more types of housing that are affordable or attainable to more people, and then identify other tools as well that could be useful in helping deal with this urgent issue. So one of the things, of course, is that Pierce County is one of the 4 counties that has a required update due by the end of 2024. That update needs to include comprehensive plan, but also certain kinds of regulations that deal with the capacity, so that there is capacity for the needed housing and other types of land uses in that jurisdiction. And one of the ways that happens, up on the right side of your screen, you'll see a little chart that shows an example update process. This is not a requirement. This is just an example of how that might be done at different local levels. So first, of course, is the opportunity for residents or for the Planning Commission and others to influence the scope of the update. How far do you want to go with your comprehensive plan in terms of what are the kinds of things that need to be considered? And that probably has already begun. And then coming up with actual draft plan policy amendments. Certainly, many communities would find they need to do that by no later than spring of 2023, and to have a draft plan to the city council in say the fall of 2023 in order to have everything completed by the end of 2024. And changes to development regulations. those, if they need to happen in order to accommodate the kinds of housing that's needed or other needs that the community has found, some of that needs to be done also by the end of 2024. So it's a matter of kind of thinking through what's needed at one's own city level. So for Lakewood, what's the need, identifying that, and kind of coming to a place where at least by that date, both the comprehensive plan and any necessary development regulations to implement the accommodation of housing need to be adopted and brought to the city council. That's obviously their job to adopt, but the planning commission has an important role in all of that, as does the public in general.
Shane, do you want to take this opportunity to just talk about notifying commerce and?
Oh, good reminder. I think you're talking about when they're going to do when they're doing their development regulations. As they do that, for example, they need to notify commerce when there's a draft.
Right.
And
there'll be a draft. You'll 60-day notice to commerce to say that you intend to adopt something. This is our opportunity to review it for consistency with the Growth Management Act, to point out areas of risk. And then the council adopts, and it's valid upon adoption, subject to appeal by anybody who has standing. So if it's appealed, it's within 60 days. And then the Puget Sound Regional Council certifies the plan. So commerce doesn't reprove the plan. Our role is to look for consistency.
Well, and I believe we also identify if there's something, you're talking about consistency with the Growth Management Act.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So that's where we will provide some input if we see a draft that maybe misses the mark. We would notify the planning department and others that need to be aware of that, and see if there's some ability to change that, or maybe we'll just be saying, great job, go for it. But the draft is a draft. It's not final until it's adopted by the city council. So the Department of Commerce, I've mentioned, has a couple specific roles in terms of planning for housing, but just as a broad overview, we also provide grants. The financial assistance that we provide is substantial. And of course, that money comes through the legislature for commerce to provide grants to communities like yours. And some of that grants come in there's various types of grants. One is certainly just a periodic review and update grant that's for general use by each city or county to update their plans and regulations. And then there's some special grants available to work on middle housing. And I believe Lakewood is going to be working on that as well. And then we have some of our assistants. For example, we have a website that you can see posted there on the screen that has a lot more information, and we'll be updating it again in the future. We also have some guidance, draft guidance that's available on the web about implementing this new law, and we will have more information and numbers for the housing coming up in the near future as well. And then middle housing technical team, again, this notion of middle housing is fairly new. I mean, it's been talked about for years, but specifically how it works at the local level has been kind of done in a lot of different ways. So we're here, a new 3-person team that includes me and 2 other people who have been experienced planning directors in the past. And we'll be providing some hands-on assistance, working with your staff and people as we need to go through this process. And we'll also be providing some information, for example, some some example ideas about middle housing that can be considered. We also have an update, a web page specifically about this update process, the periodic review process. I think you may know that every 10 years, local governments are supposed to do a significant review and update as needed their plans and regulations. They might need to do it more often, but at the least, they need to do it every 10 years. And then we have some general tools like a short course on local planning that can provide information, can be very useful about the whole larger process for planning. We focused a lot tonight on housing. So with that, any questions?
Any commissioners have any questions on this housing information? Mr. Wagaman?
This presentation is very helpful, thank you. But it's my attitude is not very good today because this was a human excrement cleanup day for me. And I'm getting tired of it because people don't have places to live and they just want to do anything they can. So as we put plans together to help people, can we assume that there are rules that people have to follow? Or can they just do whatever they darn well please?
Well, I don't know all of the background behind your question, but as you know, local governments set certain rules about what kinds of housing are allowed. They might have some design standards about housing, what it can look like, how it needs to connect to the street, what makes it feel pleasant in a neighborhood setting, whatever it is. The local government set those kinds of regulations. When it comes to who rents to whom, local governments might have some rules about that, but some things are in the private sector, or some things might have to do with particular housing agencies. I don't know quite the breadth of your question.
Well, I guess it comes, we have a lot of people walking around, they're sleeping in their cars.
Okay.
They don't have toilet facilities. They don't have, I mean, where do they cook? What do they do?
Yeah.
You know, and so what I'm seeing is rubbish all over the place. People using, you know, our landscape areas as their toilet facility. You know, so those are people obviously that need housing. And what we're talking about here is housing. And how do we, you know, we want to be compassionate, want to help. The question I'm asking is, you know, my review of Growth Management Act, I don't see that there's a lot of rules. You know, I mean, in my house, my children had to follow certain rules. In my neighborhood, I'd like my neighbors to, you know, follow some kind of rules. But we have a lot of people in our society today that don't follow any rules. They just do whatever they darn well please. And what can we do to help that? Obviously, they need housing. You know, we want to be compassionate, concerned about that. But how do we make that work?
Yeah. Well, homelessness is certainly a huge issue, and we're not actually trying to deal with that in this conversation. It's such a big issue. But hopefully it's something that you are working on. Sometimes communities do this, work with their police and so on to try to find the best solutions. What are they? Sometimes there's partnership opportunities, but this is the work that we're talking about now is not about letting people do whatever they want. This is about how do you provide at least the possibility that housing can be accommodated for the future needs. And there's a lot of other things that need to happen at different levels.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate any other comments? Seeing none at this time. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was informative, and we look forward to working through this system, and your assistance will be much appreciated.
Thank you. Best wishes.
Thank you for having us. And Tiffany, please feel free to reach out to us for any assistance you may need to work through this.
Much appreciated. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you as well. No question about it.
Take care. Thanks.
And then I am going to step in and do a second presentation regarding the same issue. There we go. And oops, I'm so proud of myself. Just as a way to help you moving forward for the next 2 years, anytime you see this logo,
Yeah.
it's the 24 process.
Yeah.
If we're talking 23, you won't see that logo. So,
Okay, good job.
Okay.
So proud. Yeah, thank you. Good job.
so as future memos
Just
come
little
to you,
things, just
just
little
know that
things,
that's, okay, we're talking the big one. You see that?
Add a girl for that.
Okay. So some of this will be similar to what you just heard from Shane and Ann, but tonight we're talking housing. There were changes to state law regarding what was required in part by cities as well as counties for their planning regarding housing. There's this new needs assessment, meaning you have so many units now, you have so much capacity on your land use, and you have so many units you need to plan for. That's now been fleshed out a little bit more. You also see the provisions for all economic segments. That's the big thing that was just talked about by Commerce as well. I'll go into a little more detail there. House Bill 1220, Shane already presented, but again, it really expanded what's required versus encouraged under the Growth Management Act. So that's why there's so much discussion in this process about housing. So what the rest of this is talking about are the needs assessment results that our consultant have come up with so far. Just a sense of where we fit in the area as a city for a number of different topics. I'll breeze through these, but please slow me down if I'm going too fast. So this is subject to final change, but it's pretty close to done. So this first graphic that you see is just demonstrating the fact that since 2010, Lakewood has grown slower at a 9.7% total over that time compared to other jurisdictions. And also the percentage equals or is, what do I say, proportionate. So 11.3% of Tacoma's population is obviously way more than if it were Lakewood's 11.3%, right? Because they're a bigger city to begin with. But this is the rate of growth. And you see, compared to those other jurisdictions listed, Lakewood has grown the least. At the same time, looking ahead for the amount of population that the city is supposed to plan for, this is the, again, between 2000 now and 2020, the rate of growth in Lakewood. And then you see that straight line, dotted line, that's a change in the rate of growth that would be needed to meet that number if it happened the same amount every year. So I can tell you that, for instance, with the downtown area and the Lakewood Station District area, those two sub areas, the idea is that most of the growth will go there. And if it's a large multifamily project, it opens all at once and a number of units get on the market right away versus 3 houses a year, year after year. Go ahead.
Who set the curve?
The number comes through the Office of Financial Management, and then Pierce County ultimately adopts it. So that is the number that is for the city of Lakewood by the year 2044.
And what was the process again? The state told the county that the county had to do it, and the county did it to the cities?
Yes, but with city input, sausage was made. So the state and the Puget Sound Regional Council at their regional level also input their projections for population statewide. And then they said, based on what we see with all our little box of criteria, this is how much we project for Pierce County overall. That number came down to the county level. The county and all of the cities here in Pierce County talked about it, said, this is what we've done so far. This is what we think we can take. And given the assumptions for us in the sub areas, that is where that number came from.
So we feel good about that curve.
We don't feel good about it. We feel like it is the best we can do. Whether it happens or not in reality is totally up to the free market at this point. Yep. Over time, so the bottom bar is 2010, and then you see 2020 above it. You can see that the colors have changed a little bit because this is the composition of city population by race. So there's been an increase in 2 or more races, for instance. There's been a decrease, of white alone. So one of the things that you'll see in the things about Lakewood is we are now a city actually that is a minority white only. It is mostly people of color now. There's 15 cities in the state that have reached that point, including Lakewood. So as of 2020, you see 46% white alone, 13% is black alone. Asian is 8.9%. Green is American Indian, Alaska Native. 3.8 is Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. Kind of that turquoisey is other, and then the 9.5 is 2 or more races. So one of the more diverse populations actually in the state, but certainly in Western Washington as well. The characteristics of income, I think this is no surprise to any of you. The income for the city of Lakewood is lower, and it has historically been lower than Pierce County. As it sits right now, you see that the median income for a household is about 20,000 less in Lakewood than it is for Pierce County. You also see there's, this is going to get wonky and I apologize, but this is talking about over time, there has been more lower income households in the total percentage of the city's population than there is in the counties. So if you were to look at a circle or a pie chart, you'd have a bigger slice in Lakewood of low income people than you would have in Pierce County. And that's why the average overall continues to remain lower. Again, looking at the low income, extremely low. What you've got here in red is the extremely low, and that is below 30% of the median family income in the area. Low is 50 to 80% of that number. Above is the over 100, very low is 30 to 50, and moderate is 80 to 100. So when Shane was reporting earlier to you about moderate, very low, low, extremely low, that's how it breaks out, is 30, 50 to 80, 30 to 50, 80 to 100. And what you see here in Lakewood is that out of all of them, obviously there's more renters, 22% versus 6% that are at the extremely low income. You switch over to above the median income, only 22% of renters are there, but 61% of homeowners are there.
I struggle a little bit, maybe my eyes are messed up. But moderate income, 80 to 100% looks green. I don't see any green up on those bars.
No, there's no green. It's your eyes, Paul. Okay, so red, pink, pale blue, a little darker blue, darkest blue. You're talking about this one?
No, that's in the far bottom right. It says moderate
Yep,
income. And
that's-
it says green. It's green little checkbox.
The key, your key.
It looks
Green.
green, but it's that middle blue.
Right there?
Yeah.
That's interesting. It looks blue to me.
Oh, well,
Interesting.
what's the color does it look?
Blue, but
Looks
men
blue to
have
me,
a
but-
problem
It
with
looks blue, but it
color
could just be the angle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It might be, or the shading that you have on your glasses.
Yeah, it's got a green tint.
That's funny.
Okay.
That's funny.
No problem.
So anyway, it's the 10, the 11, and the 11 is the moderate.
I'm back here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, that's
I
okay.
didn't think I was colorblind.
No, no.
No, really, the renter household.
Yeah, renter households are, in fact, a higher percentage of them are of color than white. And some of this we hear anecdotally all the time, but this is data that's actually going to be backing this stuff up in the city of Lakewood. So out of the white alone, you have, for instance, 55% of the population is an owner versus 45 that are renters. If you compare that to the of color, which would include all of these, 68% of them rent versus 32 own. So just bearing out some things that you probably have heard.
As a quick question there, it says 2018 and then 22 at the bottom. Is that
Yeah.
what's been updated?
This is two different data sources. 2028, that number is actually been updated to 2019, which is the most recent that we can get before this is finished. Burke is our consultant that put this together this year.
Got it.
Again, looking at breakout by race and income, you'll see the point of this slide is just to demonstrate that the Black or African American population at extremely low is higher than all of the other categories. And this will bear out as we get into more discussions about renting versus owning, etc. Homelessness. So coming back to a little bit of the questions that you had, Mr. Wagman, you have showing over time the percentage of students that were reported as homeless. This number here, the 2021 and 21-22 are probably affected by COVID. The ability to get accurate data over the last few years, I think for everything has been a little stressed. So whether those actually went down versus going up is a question I don't know that we'll ever be able to fully answer, but this is just showing in general, certainly since 2014, the number of reported homeless students in the district has gone up.
If you have I have a question a couple slides back.
Sure. This one.
So one of them, it was back even further, it was about the income. And so with more and more people working from home, is there any way to track like how many people are working remotely in Lakewood that, you know, have jobs up in Seattle? Or, and I guess, and does that even matter? Maybe, I'm not really sure, but it just seems like it's going to be kind of hard to like track like where, like, you know, just because a job is based out of somewhere doesn't really, I don't, you know, I don't know. How does that all play into things, I guess? Because I know that they have to pay taxes and stuff wherever your job, you know, is based, I guess, and those things. But, you know, with more and more people working remotely, how does that kind of shift how, you know, everything works, I guess? Because you can kind of like, you can live wherever, you know, a lot of these jobs are just fully remote.
You're absolutely right. And this is again, one of those weird, awkward interim times right now where we can't get you a good answer. You'll see in a couple slides, we talk a little bit about the workforce and where they live versus where they work. That's all going to be data probably pre-2020. So it's pre-COVID. It's pre the surge for remote working. Over the next few years, we'll get a little more information. But for right now, we're only going to be able to give you as good as the data that's available, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that I get that. And I guess, you know, just maybe, you know, just a thought, I guess, is like, you know, we're setting up for these different types of housing, but, you know, maybe we also need to be thinking about, you know, housing that can be, you know, what do people need that work fully remotely? And, you know, maybe incorporating like a small conference room or something into, you know, a large apartment building, you know, that someone could use, or some, you know, occasionally if they needed to or something. I don't know. But it just, you know, kind of having some of that forward thinking, I guess, about, you know, how can we do things better to set, you know, ourselves up for what I think is probably going to, you know, continue on as more people working remotely.
So, Mr. Pearson, that is a great comment, because several years ago, Boeing did exactly that when they downsized and tried to eliminate some of their facilities. Instead of everyone driving to a facility, especially in the Longacres properties and stuff, they built huge office buildings. And several years ago, I would go in there and the whole floor would be empty. There would be no personnel. But what they did was they worked around the surrounding areas at the hotels that were in that area, and they'd have a conference room there, and once a week or something, all of the Boeing employees that used to go to that office facility now go to this office conference room at the hotel, and had little cubicles, and they set up and they, you know, come in and work as a team in there, and then go home and work remotely. So, and consistently now up to today, that still has been used a lot in various areas. So very good comment.
And I'm obviously tangentially related anymore or involved with the private market, but from what I've seen, little tidbits about is that the housing market is already responding with expanding multi-purpose rooms in houses, or creating some square footage set aside for the home office, where in the past it wouldn't necessarily be that way. So I think it's starting to come into at least the single family townhome market. I'm not so sure about the apartment side, but yeah, the idea of maybe design centers including encouragement or incentives for a community type room where people could do that, for sure.
I guess the other thing that needs to be, when you're talking about that, is connectivity.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly in the education side, we're beating that drum all over the place, but you know, when people are trying to work from remotely, if they don't have connectivity, what do you know, how does that work?
Yep. So continuing with some data dump here, this is showing that with within the renters, and again, this is something that maybe you think of anecdotally, but here's actually some data to back it up. Many of those that are at the very low and extremely low income levels have disabilities or self-care issues. And so you have 80%, for instance, of extremely low have some sort of, 20% of them, self-care or independent living limitations. 18% at the very low, it's a little smaller at the low and moderate or higher income. So that is a factor as some of these renters are trying to find places to live. A lot of words. This is where we get into where people work and where they live. So I'll just get right down to where you see the top locations for Lakewood workers. So more people working in Lakewood live in Tacoma. About 4% more than actually live in Lakewood. And then you see others spread here: Parkland, South Hill, UP, Spanaway, Puyallup, Federal Way, Frederickson, and Graham. But between, again, Tacoma and Lakewood, more people live in Tacoma and work here than Lakewood people work in Lakewood. Flipping it, those who live in Lakewood, about 22% go to Tacoma, about 15% stay in Lakewood. And then you see Seattle, Fife, Puyallup, Kent, Auburn, Olympia, Bellevue, and UP are the other ones that were listed. And these are all basically 2% and above. That's why this list is what it is. And when I saw the 15% of those that live and work in Lakewood, I thought, wow, that's really low. According to the consultants, that's actually pretty high. Most people, or many jurisdictions have a lower number than that. Housing supply. You remember the Build of the Lands report. This came to the commission last year. But essentially there was, hey, we got capacity for our housing that's required between now and 2034, no problem. However, the big caveat there, 78% of that growth capacity is on underutilized sites. Lakewood is built out, Lakewood doesn't have greenfields, Lakewood has underdeveloped properties where redevelopment will need to happen in order for this capacity to be used. That, of course, turns right back into your anti-displacement question to Mr. Remy tonight. But Lakewood is going to have to grapple with what gets redeveloped, and if there's somebody already living on that parcel, let alone working, but if they're living on this in some kind of development now, where are they going to go next? How is that going to be addressed? This is kind of a cool map. It shows all of the areas that are either residential or mixed zoning where residential is allowed in the city. So single family residential is the lighter yellow, and it's the vast majority of the acreage in the city. There are various densities within residential. You'll see the red is the commercial mixed use. So for instance, here's the downtown sub-area plan. You'll see multifamily in brown. Neighborhood business, which is it's mixed use, but it's more neighborhood than the commercial only. Shades of gray, if you will. And then the commercial mixed use again down here along the I-5 corridor. So the white areas that you see on the map, that's going to be like right here, all this white stuff. This is the active potential zones from McCord Field, which is right here. And then over to the west side of the city, you've got Western State Hospital and Fort Silicon Park. Those are the biggest ones. But those areas that are white, they're either so commercial that you don't have any residential allowed. This would be an industrial area. This is the industrial park. Or it's a public institution. Growth of housing, production of housing. Obviously, there's been more recently than in the past, but basically, between 2010 and 2022, a net increase of not even 0.2%. Right? It's a low number compared to the total jurisdiction. And again, the city's built out. The area is only 25 years old in the city, but it's been around for over 100 years in terms of development.
Mr. Combs has a question. Right here.
Sorry.
The question is, do we have the income or the property map or as well, in addition to the zoning?
Oh, for the one that we just were looking at?
Yeah, I know that we had it for other slides previously, and I just thought I mean, we don't need to dive into it right now, but you'll notice this map matches that map.
Yes,
which is a very common theme in cities all across the area, but I think that that is something as we're looking at how do we solve our low income housing issue. One of the other challenges we're also trying to address is how do we get them into housing that is has more coverage and canopy and those types of things. And so as we look at where we're recommending and making changes, doing it in the places that we already have it may not be the best solution. And so I put it out there as planning to see, we'll talk about it more later, I'm sure.
absolutely,
But
yeah.
just think that
Yeah.
if we try and put all of the low income in the same area, we continue to have the exact same problem that we already have.
Well, and keep in mind that 78% is on underutilized property, right, of the capacity that the city has. It's your residential zones, particularly R1 and R2, which are historic and predate the city. The difficulty of densifying in those areas, of course, is big. And so that has to be weighed against, we have to do these things versus can we do these things? But to Mr. Combs' point, this is Tillicum, this is Woodbrook, this is Springbrook, Lakewood, and Lakeview, and then up to the east up here is the Monte Vista, and those are the areas that have been recognized by the federal government as high poverty. And it's also where you've got some of the most diverse parts of the city. There was never anything like redlining in Lakewood. The city wasn't even around during that period of time, but you see just the way development has happened over time, that the same ideas ring true, where you've got higher percentage of renters, higher percentage of people of color, less tree canopy, closer to the I-5 corridor where you've got that pollution and whatever, how that affects your life. So these issues are bearing out with the data.
Can I just add one more to that?
Please, yeah.
So one of the things I was hope to say, and I mentioned this before, we were talking about a long time ago, that if we have multiple low-income housing projects and we put them in these demographics, it will continue to have this effect. And so it perpetuates this, hey, here's our problem area versus showing, okay, here is how we can spread out. And we do have some challenges for sure. Like how do you putting it in a single family and all of a sudden changing the zoning. So it's got to be well thought out and strategic. And I don't have the magic pill, but I know you probably could.
Well, this will be really central to the discussion of the next 2 years, not only at your level, but at the city council. One of the things too, just as a tangent to this, is you as a planning commission, as well as the city council, has said you're interested in having an advisory board established, whether it be, or actually possibly two, where you've got a subcommittee of the council and or a public stakeholder advisory group assisting this whole process for the 24 review. And so if that were to occur, this again will be an issue that we're trying to make sure we have the right people at the table giving feedback. Talked about housing production. So again, this kind of goes back to what you saw at the start, the number of units being created per year historically between 20 and 2020, 2000 and 2020, versus what it would need to be in order to hit the number, right? And again, it obviously won't happen on a straight line, but it is a significant increase to what's been done historically in the city. A little side note, comparing Lakewood to Federal Way, Puyallup, UP, and Fife, you'll see that actually Lakewood has had a higher percentage of multifamily developed compared to single family out of all of the jurisdictions. Only Federal Way was the one that had a lower percentage of single family versus multifamily. Jumping topics to rent. No surprise here. Between 2001 and 2021, you see it's gone up across the board, but these are the various types of multifamily or effective rent. Studio is the $992, one bedrooms at $1,157, $1,440 for 2 bedroom, $2,062 for 3 bedroom. Rent affordability. So this is getting into percentages of statistical stuff, but basically, long story short, it's becoming less affordable in each one of these categories. You have to make more money to still consider this affordable, which is that 30% of your gross income per month. right? Vacancy rates are also dropping. And this is true of both the greater market, which is at about 4% now, according to this estimate. Lakewood is lower than that, so the market is tighter in Lakewood compared to the Seattle area overall that they looked at. And that predates COVID. That's going back to 2015 is when they start tracking the downturn.
That goes back to your previous slide as well.
Yeah, yeah. Lakewood is, quote, more affordable than Pierce County, but it's not as affordable as it used to be itself. It continues to get less affordable. Housing prices here are lower than in Pierce County, but they are continuing to go up. As it stands in estimated 2022, home value to median income in Pierce County, your house is worth 5.94 of your annual income, 5.494 times. In Lakewood, and again, this goes to the value of, or the median income for Lakewood residents, it's up at 7.33. So housing has become less, I'm sorry, go ahead.
How does that number work?
Yeah, it's twisting your tongue into knots here talking about this. Pierce County-
Tiffany, is there like, oh, I guess it has over time. Okay, never mind.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, that's okay. This is saying in 2022, the 7.33 number is saying that Lakewood's home value to your median income, your home value is 7.33 times your income. It's less affordable to you because it's that much more in value compared to what you're making. So this goes into, for instance, going back that slide that showed so many people that own a house, they are actually extremely low income. In Pierce County, people are making more in relation to what their house value is, so that's why it's a 5.94 instead of the 7.33. Cost burden, how much of your monthly cost for housing is in relation to your gross income? 30% or more is cost burden, 50% or more is severely cost burden. In Lakewood, half of all renters, or at least 50%, are somewhat cost burden, so between 30 and 50%. But you've got a significant percentage that are severely cost burden, meaning they're paying more than half of their monthly income on their housing. And you see that overall, it's about 17%, but it's 23% in the renter world and 9% in the owner world. A lot on this slide as well. I'll try to summarize it. The lower income renters are having a harder time. 69% of those between 0 and 30% of median income are severely cost burdened. Yeah. Altogether, if you added all of these together, 23% of the renters are severely cost burdened. 27% of them are, quote, cost burdened. So if you add those two together, you've got a full 50+% that are paying at least 30% plus. Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see how this translates over the next year with interest rates being over 7%.
Yeah.
Because like just the price of a home doesn't really matter as much as like, you know, a 3.5% interest rate on a $500,000 house versus a $500,000 house with 7+ interest. I mean, that's a massive cost.
Yep. Race, again, this goes back to what we were talking about a little bit at the first about the stereotypes hold true in Lakewood, or I don't want to call it a stereotype, but anecdotal evidence. 35% of Black or African American and 27% here versus up in the white alone, 24% and 26%. So up here, yes, you still have a significant portion, either cost burden or severely cost burden, higher significantly in the Black African American population. Affordable renting versus the number of households that you have. There are 2,000.
Can you go
Sorry.
back to that last slide again?
Sure.
No problem.
No, that's good. looking at households, the number at a particular income bracket versus the number of units available. So 3,750 households in Lakewood are estimated to be at the 50 to 80% area median income. There's 7,460 units. Conversely, 80% or above, you've got more people needing it and less units available. Same idea over here with the less than 30. So 30 to 50 and 50 to 80, in theory, you've got more than enough for those income brackets, but is this the one that talks about it? Yeah, up renting and low and down renting. You may well have people in this income bracket renting here because it's more affordable, obviously, and they have other income for other things. And so that's also playing in the market. But what that does is if these guys are using these units, these guys maybe aren't, kind of thing. So it's dominoes in both directions. There is an issue over time of loss of units. So, you know, remember that we construct so many per year and then they last for so long, but there is this loss over time of units, and whether it's just through redevelopment or whether it's nuisance and abatement because it's not being kept up, whatever, we have to just look at net numbers. So that's the general point here. You saw earlier that Commerce was talking about the number of housing units per bracket, income bracket. This is very preliminary. Don't think this is the final result. But going back to our population targets that you saw earlier, that 86,792, that's the target population, which means a growth of 23,180 people. If you translate that into housing units, it's about 2.3, 2.4 people per household is the assumption. So that translates into about 9,700 units, whether they be multifamily, single family, between now and 2044. However, that is the pre-1220 change where you have to now plan for income bracket. Down here, we'll see this is the very preliminary results for Lakewood. Out of the 9,700 units, what this is suggesting is that permanent supportive, which is people that are unable to take care of themselves for whatever reason, be it a mental, physical disability, whatever it is, there's about 2,200 of those units needed, about 1,500 between the 30 to 50% of median income, about 1,620 for 50 to 80, 732 for 80 to 100, 653, and then you have some additional units at whatever price you want. And then the emergency housing need, the temporary shelter, is about 350 units is estimated. So getting to your comments earlier, Mr. Agman, talking about the growing visible population of homeless in the city, it's not unique to Lakewood, obviously, but the estimated need for units for that population is at about 350.
So Tiffany, so just an example of the comp plan, the applications that have before us, the 4 private. So LASA is proposing, and their one thing is 24 of those units that you're talking, that number. So relating to exactly what we're looking at. So they propose 24 units, and it could be in the emergency, the last column.
It could be here,
or
yeah.
it could be down there.
Yep.
Okay. And Mr. Remy's project, you know, he's got 90 units, to some 94 or whatever. So those as well, how many of those 94 are going to go into each one of these categories of, you know, studio, low income, and 3-bedroom.
Right.
So those are the projects that we're talking about putting in to accommodate facilities and to get to our numbers.
Correct.
And what Mr. Larson, and why we're right here, is Mr. Larson commented on is maybe the Planning Commission can take a look before our next meeting and look at that area where Mr. Remy was, you know, project, and is it make sense way to make a recommendation to maybe expand that area, because now the area that Mr. Combs mentioned about not just putting low income into those, this is an area that matches or kind of helps all those scenarios. We got tree canopy, we can still have in the area that's not in the low income. So I'm just putting in perspective of what's before us already, to how to accomplish examples of moving forward.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yep. I can't remember if I have another sign up. Okay, yeah, so, one more thing. The 2044 growth target total again was about 9,700 units was identified for the city of Lakewood. Breaking that up by the area median income under this House Bill 1220 requirement, again, you have those units based by 0 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 80. Out of all of that, that's not all of the units that the city's supposed to plan for. There's about 2,900 that don't fall into any of these categories, so they could in theory be built at any income, and we would be fine. And then again, the 351 emergency housing units that have been identified. So as you just said, Mr. Chair, this is going to be very complicated to try to figure out where these might be planned for, what happens to those that may already live there, the anti-displacement questions. And what do you do with the well-established neighborhoods where, whether it's because of the way the house is located on a lot, whether the infrastructure that supports that neighborhood can handle this. I mean, this is going to pay ripples and ripples and ripples. So the city's role in this whole discussion is to try to pave the way for developers to come in and be able to build and redevelop. And again, that I'll just keep repeating it, 78% of the capacity identified for the city is on underutilized lots. So it's not rebuilds we're talking about.
So the planning commission before us, we're gonna be seeing, my projection, my thinking is that we're gonna have more applications for rezonings. And unless we think forward enough to where we might have an application currently, you know, the O2, Mr. Rennie's property, thinking that, hey, listen, is that the smartest thing? Should we increase that area in the zoning to accomplish some of these things moving forward?
Yeah.
Yes,
So
Mr. Larson.
Well, first of all, I really commend you for putting all this data together. I mean, what a gargantuan job. And to make it understandable in a presentation is the next part. Gargantuan job. My first question is this set up in a matrix so that we can put a variable in or change a variable and it changes everything else out?
That's part of what Commerce is developing right now. Yes.
Okay.
So when they said things are almost quite done, yeah.
Because among other things, we're headed for a major recession, right? And it's going to have a lot of unemployment with it. And it's going to have a lot of effect on these different populations, especially the Black lower income households. And you know, they're just immense things that would go along with that kind of a variable getting interjected into what the state lords over us and says you've got to have something done by 2024.
Yep.
Well, guess what? What goes wrong?
Sure.
So those are so yeah. So if we've got the ability to manipulate the data such that we can see what certain assumptions would do, that would be a big help.
Yep.
And then from Mr. Kuhn's perspective, getting all of these houses on 9,000 to 15,000 square foot lots that are 60 and 70 years old, and they're habitable, and what kind of a densification incentive can we give so that exactly what LASA is doing, which is buying single family houses on large lots and getting land utilization from it.
Yep.
You know, where can we look to see where that kind of thing can be done, and then create a structure to incentivize a developer to come and say, okay, I'll buy 4 houses and build 20 in an organized.
But they'll cut down all the trees.
And see, that's the other thing.
Well,
Don't all of our things create a conundrum in some way? I mean, that's part of why we're here, is because it is a challenge to balance all those out, and that's the dance Tiffany's doing every day.
It's
That's
the,
a good point.
it's
That's
the,
why
cli-
we have a substitution of stem count for trees that you're removing.
Yeah.
We've got the ability already to fundamentally deal with that. And also the existing trees that are gonna stay are growing bigger, and so it's not a matter of number of trees, it's a matter of canopy.
That's true, but
Mr.
they
Combs?
get, I just, one of my jobs, I had to repair a fence the other day, one of those worshiping oak trees, its limb came down. Luckily, they didn't get the kids that planted their yard. I mean, it trashed the fence.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
and the thing that we talked about in that was the arborist.
Maintenance as time goes on, and that's for sure, and so, yeah, and so, yeah, protecting a particular kind of tree, a Gary oak, that are plentiful. So anyway, I don't want to.
Mr. Combs.
But since we've got the ability to manipulate that data, while we're going to happen, that's gonna be really big for us to do.
I mean, I just thought and I agree, I commend you for all that. There's a ton that goes into that report, and housing is something I've spent a lot of time working on over the years. One thing for the commission that I can say has been successful, witnessed it firsthand in building or managing those buildings, is these mixed income, avoiding pockets of poverty. Just a single low income property is going to create a problem eventually. It's just, how much do you do with that? Because when you have a lower income bracket, that feeds off of itself. That's why they don't do it anymore. And so the more mixed income we can have, where there's a lower income level, the next income level, and if we can incentivize that, we can't control the free market, as you were calling it before. We don't get to control that, but we definitely can influence how it happens here with incentives that we offer. And we have been underdeveloped for a long time. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is why? Why don't people want to build here? Why don't they want to move here? And, what's holding us back? And, we may not like the answers, but I think that's something we have to look at as we evaluate, because we are on the lower spectrum all around here. And I do think when you have new low income go in, you're going to find exactly what I think a couple people said already, is that you're going to draw from those other areas, and you're not going to necessarily solve the person of color goal of how do we get more people of color having home ownership and staying here. Whoever can afford it is going to take it. And so whatever, right now there is a higher proportion of them in that category, but I don't know that actually solves any diversity problem other than that. So I go back to, how do we fix that? And how do we raise people of color out of that lower category, not just try and create a housing for that? And so, yeah, we're putting a Band-Aid on something, but we're not solving the real root of it or anything like that. And I'm no economist, but that's what I've read. And so, and a lot of the urban housing stuff that I've studied over the years is it's not going to solve it. And I haven't seen it work effectively, but I have seen mixed incomes work effectively. And a lot of people would say, I don't want it next door. But when you put it all together, guess what? No one really knows and no one really cares. And so the more we can figure out, and I'm curious to see how it spreads out. I think we do go into this. How do we try and look at zoning pockets to try and spread this out in a strategic way so that it doesn't create a big backlog? I don't want to be stuck trying to review one-offs and then, someone gets upset. Let's have a plan and let's put it into play.
Yeah. In this mixed use thing, sociologically, do you see the different striations influencing each other such that like a poor kid, 6 or 7 years old, is living in a complex with people that are regular jobs and driving a little bit nicer car and that kind of thing, and being putting ideas in the young child's head that there is a better life and have that influence being positive?
I've looked, I've only seen on larger scale projects, so I suspect you might see that on a more intimate level where you have a duplex or a fourplex. But on the larger projects, no one knows who falls into what income category. And so it's complete, as long as it's balanced, then, and usually leaning more towards market, because as you can see, there's a higher demand in the market category. But I think that they intermingle kind of, I think of it as when I was a kid, I had no idea which friends of mine were wealthy or not wealthy. I thought I was poor. And so you just kind of, just hang out with each other, just like the people in the apartments would do. And so I think that's what it was. I never observed any strife, but I don't know that I witnessed any more cohesion. I just like to see that it actually worked. A lot of people say it can't work. You get this kind of discontent, and that was not the case.
If I could just make a kind of a point of hope to wrap this up a little bit. This is the downtown area, the Lakewood Station District area is kind of right here. And these two areas already have been upzoned. So if you remember, for instance, in the downtown, people can go up to 100 units per acre. And the Lakewood Station, I think it's 80. But the idea is that is where most of this 9,700 housing unit stuff is going to go. And from what we've heard from the new owners of Lakewood Town Center, they're in the middle of putting out an RFP for a multifamily developer to come in and work with them. They're interested in bringing housing to this area, which is the idea. And we have, I think it's up to 600 units being planned right across the street from the Station District. So it's starting, but the incentives and the encouragements within code is going to, I think, turn the corner faster than otherwise. So as the development regulations get updated along with the zoning and whatever else the city decides to do, that's going to help change up some of the stuff that we see right now.
We ask ourselves, I ask myself, is when I go to UP and when I go to Proctor District, and I mean all over, I see go down to Kent Station, Kent Commons area, and I'm like, why are these all coming there? Why is that? Why isn't it here in Lakewood? And so that's the incentives. It's got to be something that is different than what we have. And so,
and Kent's a pretty good example. 50% of Kent is non-white, and is minority population.
okay, so we'll go.
And it's a whole gamut.
So Tiffany, do we have any other updates?
No, that's it, Mr. Chair. Next meeting, we will be back in the other room. And if you do have any suggested amendments that you would like for the
Okay.
23 stuff, please let me know.
Okay, and Mr. Pearson, can you, are you going to be available next 2 weeks, the 19th? So that's.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, because I doubt if I will be here. Previously I said I'm going to be in New Orleans, and I don't think the chair trying to run the meeting in Bourbon Street, I don't know if it's going to occur. So, I don't know if I'll pull myself away. I'm only there for a week, so, but if you, that I'd appreciate it. And that would, yeah, a lot of beignets. So because it'll be the conclusion of closing out the public hearing and stuff. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And just a real fast thing as well. If you hadn't had a chance to look at the council's planning the study session, they went into quite detail about the tree preservation code. And if you haven't heard about it or heard what some of the suggestions are, it's a little bit different than what we recommended. I mean, I shouldn't say little, it's a lot different. So just for food of thought, is take a look at it.
Would we have copies of that sent to us?
You can see it on Zoom. You can go to YouTube, YouTube, and here, but you can see the whole minutes and stuff. But Zoom is, YouTube is the easiest way because you can hear everyone.
Was it approved?
No,
It's
it's
not
not
been
voted
voted
on yet. It's not voted, but it's, yeah, I just urged the planning commission. Thank you. Any other?
No, I'm
Others
sorry,
go
Mr. Chair,
through?
just one more time for October 19th, we'll continue the 2024 discussions, but it'll also be potentially action on the 23 docket. If you want to take another meeting after you see and get edits or additional public comments, feel free. But we'll be back in council chamber.
Yeah, Ms. Larson?
With respect to your wanting to move the meeting along, there were, I had 3 more comments on the proposals that were before us. One was with regard to the Lakewood Racket Club's application. Seems consistent with what they do and what's around them and the land ability to do it. It actually was originally zoned that way. They changed it and now it's changing back. So that's the first thing. The second thing is with regard to the city of Lakewood's expansion of Ward Park thing. I think that can be done globally. To say a single family residential property next to a park, it automatically qualifies as parkland. And so the city doesn't have to be burdened by a whole process to go through. We should be able to manage that kind of a simple assimilation globally and get her done.
Meaning it's automatically approved, or the city has basically.
They don't have to go
Review
through
over
the
it.
zoning process. It's a matter of compatibility with the neighbors in the neighborhood and finessing that and pretty easily done.
Staff
Is-
staff would know better.
Yeah, I would take staff's recommendation on that.
Yeah, staff recommendation would be able to do that.
Okay.
And then the last one is the
Non-conforming.
the application for the commercial use in what looks like to be in the middle of a residential area. That use has been there a long, long time, like 50 years.
The commercial businesses.
It's a commercial business. It's there. It's always been in the home building construction world. And to me, it's a benign zoning change. Technically, it's spot zoning. The only thing we want to be careful of is unintended consequences. So something else that's in a C1 zone that might not be compatible with single family residential, then that needs to be understood in the granting of that application. So I think those are the only
And just going further on that one, as is, they can continue, even if somebody else takes over, they can still use that property around the same type of activity.
Yeah, maybe I should add to that though, when you're non-conforming, you have different guidelines on how you rebuilding or actually lending, borrowing on it. There are certain lenders you won't work on or allow that kind of thing. And so you do end up tying the hands of the owner to some degree on what they can do with it moving forward. Whether it's developing a little bit more, adding to expanding, or even getting proper financing if they do try and change hands and stuff like that. That can be a little bit of a burden. So I tend to agree. I think it is a little bit of spot zoning, which I don't like to do, but in that particular case, it does kind of make a lot more sense because it does fit with that use historically. It doesn't impact adversely the neighbors around it, or we haven't heard such accordingly. So I would probably lean towards doing that, but it does give me a little comfort knowing you can do it with the non-conforming and continue operating, but just to free up that owner from not being tied up with it, I think it would be better to approve it.
Okay. Thank you. For the
Yeah, no
time.
problem. Okay, thank you all. Appreciate it. We'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Happy to get down so fast.
I came down early.